Good morning. I'm Antoinette Mosley, the Vice Mayor of the City of Asheville, and I'd like to welcome you to the December 5th, 2024 Agenda Briefing Work Session. All council members and staff are participating virtually. The live meeting will be streamed on the city's YouTube channel, accessed through the YouTube icon on the front page of the city's website or via the live stream. The live meeting will be available on Charter Spectrum Channel 193. You may listen to the meeting via phone at 855-925-2801, meeting code 7330. We will not take public comments during this meeting. Council and staff, please unmute yourselves and say a quick hello. Councilmember Sage Turner.
Good morning.
Councilmember Kim Roney.
Good morning.
Councilmember Maggie Ullman.
Hey, everybody. Sorry, I had a mute issue.
Councilmember Shanika Smith.
Good morning.
Councilmember Bo Hess.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Good morning.
City Attorney Brad Branham.
Good morning, everyone.
And City Clerk Maggie Burleson.
Good morning.
Mayor Esther Mannheimer and City Manager Deborah Campbell are attending the Metro Mayor's Conference in Wilmington and will not be joining us today. I'll now turn it over to Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Mosley, and good morning, Council. I'm going to do our agenda review today, and I'm going to jump right in. And as usual, I'm going to cover the items that I think are of interest. If there's anything I don't cover you want to discuss, or if you have any questions, please just stop me. So we'll start with our meeting, or our day next Tuesday. We'll begin with the Recovery Efforts Work Session. That work session is scheduled to begin at 3 p.m. It's going to take place in the council chambers. And we are going to discuss that or be able to answer questions about that work session in more detail later today under the other issues and updates when we really focus on some of the Helene-related recovery efforts. I'm going to go ahead and move to our formal meeting agenda, which begins at 5 p.m. We've got a pretty long consent agenda one more time, or again, I think that's because we're only meeting once a month currently. But I'll start with items, and I'm going to group some items together today just to kind of get us through this. But again, please flag anything you want to discuss in more detail. I'll start with items B through F. These items are ratifications of storm-related contracts for the in-reservoir treatment at the Burnett Reservoir at North Fork, as well as the evaluation and minor repairs that are needed to the dams and spillways at Bee Tree and North Fork. These are pretty minor contracts in a sense, but we do expect or anticipate that 100% of these expenses will be reimbursed by FEMA. So again, all of these items are ratifications for work or contracts that have already been underway related to our water system. Item G is another ratification. This ratifies an interlocal agreement with Buncombe County, under which the county will facilitate the application process for private and commercial property debris removal. And we've talked about this, or the county has several times at our recent press briefings. While it is anticipated that 100% of these expenses will be reimbursed by FEMA during the first 180 days, the interlocal agreement does require the city to reimburse the county for any expenses not covered by FEMA, but we don't expect this to be a concern, as we expect the private and commercial property debris removal to be completed within that 180-day period. Moving on, item H is long in description. It's one of our longer, I think, agenda item descriptions, but it basically ratifies previous storm-related fee waivers or adjustments that were made. And those are principally made to development fees that DSD typically assesses. What this item also does, though, is it expands the city manager's authority to adjust fees and charges that don't require a public hearing during a declared state of emergency. Moving forward, this type of language or similar language will be included in the city's annually adopted fees and charges manual. And what this covers is fees that are typically suspended or were suspended in this case following Hurricane Helene. Included the waiver or reduction of transit fares, parking fees, street closure fees, and then, as we discussed earlier, storm-related permitting and inspection fees.
So Ben, this is going to be an ongoing document now, but we didn't need it before. We were able to act, but now we need to contract it.
So a little bit of history. After when COVID happened, we waived permitting and inspection fees, and these are really ones that were out of DSD.
Mm-hmm.
And what we did at that time is we put language in the annual fees and charges manual that kind of made that the case. So that gave the city manager the administrative ability to waive these fees in a state of emergency. What we found is that authority really only covered the DSD fees. And so what this action does, and Brad, you can jump in if I miss anything, it's going to retroactively authorize the fees that we waived outside of DSD. But then our intent is moving forward is to have this type of fee waiver a little broader in scope and allow the city manager to initiate that. And the purpose of that is it lets us within days of a disaster go ahead and put those fee waivers in place. Brad, do I have anything you want to add to that?
Just one thing, Ben, which I think you've covered it very well, but I will add that it's been mentioned, this is something that the council has already done in previous situations, specifically in the pandemic. The language there was very limited, though. It was limited not only to what kinds of fees that the manager could adjust or waive, but it also was specific to the pandemic. So in order for this to be a going concern as we have other potential future disasters, this is not allowing the manager to adjust any of these fees on a whim. This is only when there is a declared state of emergency affecting Asheville. We'd be able to be much more nimble and make those adjustments or fee waivers very quickly without having to wait for a council meeting or without having to potentially have to come to you after the fact of the ratification. So this allows us to go ahead and have that authority only under the very specific circumstances of a state of emergency. And again, this would come as part of council's annual fees and charges manual. So if council ever decided that they wanted to remove this authority, they could do that at least annually at any point when you approve the fees and charges manual around the time that you approve your annual budget.
Any more questions on that? And the staff report that'll be posted later today has a lot of detail about those fees and the fee amount, so you can get a good look for what that means in terms of revenue impacts. So moving on, that kind of concludes the part of the consent where we have storm-related ratifications. Councilwoman Turner, sorry.
Ben, I'm just hoping at some point we'll see, are we close to having a summary of all those fees and foregone costs?
Yep, it's in the staff report. I know Rachel's kind of taking the lead on that. Rachel, do you want to add anything to that? Or I think it's pretty straightforward, but.
Yep, after you see the staff report, if there's another level of detail, Councilmember Turner or rest of City Council, please let us know and we're happy to provide that to you.
Thank you.
Great. So moving on, I'm gonna actually jump down to item M. Actually, I'm going to highlight three together again. I'm going to highlight consent items J, K, and M. And Councilman Roney, you may have an item prior to that you want to discuss.
Yeah, it's just a follow-up to the fees and charges conversation, because I imagine this will come up again during the annual fees and charges report when we do have our next annual budget. Or is this the kind of question that would be most helpful to put in the database where we're putting our questions right now? Or if there's going to be multiple questions coming at staff from different angles, could that be in a memo so it's in one place and we all have updated information?
We are planning on doing a follow-up document like we typically do for today's agenda briefing. And so if there are a series of questions related to the fee waiver, probably the most efficient way would just be, let us know what your question is. We'll capture that. And then prior to Tuesday's council meeting, as is typically our practice, we'll provide a response in writing to all the questions that are raised today in preparation for the council meeting on Tuesday.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, consent items J, K, and M. These are amendments to existing contracts with equipment rental companies and heavy truck and equipment repair vendors that the city typically uses throughout a fiscal year. They're here on this consent agenda because we need to increase the amounts of those contracts due to demand associated with our Hurricane Helene response. And so basically in these three contracts, the not to exceed limits of each contract will be doubled to allow for continued utilization through the remainder of the fiscal year. And I just want to highlight that to kind of demonstrate some of the impacts that we've seen as part of the response to this disaster and kind of some of the pivots, the changes that we're having to make so departments can continue to provide those essential services. Moving on to item O. This is actually a good news item, I believe, and I just want to take a minute on behalf of the city of Asheville to thank the community for their approval of the 4 general obligation bonds that were on the November ballot. And council, with your approval of this resolution, you will certify and declare the results of those 4 referenda items, and that begins the process of moving us forward towards implementing those bonds and the projects associated with those. So again, just want to highlight that as kind of a good news item and thank the community. Councilman Turner.
Thank you, Ben. That is great news. This is actually about an item that was skipped, so I don't know if Kim was going to speak to bonds. I was just wondering if we could talk about L for a second.
Yeah, before we go back, I know that there are questions in the community, especially around the Parks and Rec bonds. And I imagine there's going to be some curiosity around this if we're staying on the course for our conversations leading up to the bonds, or I think the community is concerned there would be a deviation from that level of commitment. So we might want to just be prepared for some more questions around our plans and strategies for implementation.
My question about L was, so it's the water meter lids, and I'm just kind of curious, just bigger picture thinking, like, I guess this is something that was underway. I know we've had a myriad of different meter lids, but in light of everything that's happening, is this an expense that we should continue to move forward on, or any of these kind of things being stalled, or we just like finish out contracts? Because I don't know what this item costs, but is replacing meter lids really that important right now? And is there any thinking around that kind of stuff?
So good question. And this is associated with the advanced metering infrastructure project. So we do have existing budget that will, I mean, we always needed new lids associated with the new meters. It was just, we found we had to, as it says, we had to create.
But so they're just not uniform. Like we have several across the community and we want to make it uniform. And I guess my question is like, is there a broader review of all the money we're spending on water to say maybe this one's could wait till 2027? I don't know. I mean, they're not attached to the new meters. It's just the lid. Right.
I got you. Yeah. And again, I think this in the grand scheme of water's budget, this is very minimal and it's already included in the, this is a $27 million project. So it's not much. It's pretty minor, but to answer your question, yes. I mean, part of, these recovery support groups and part of what we're doing as a community is we're going to have to look at some of these capital projects that have been planned out for 5 or 10 years and do some prioritization. So, I mean, I think Councilman Turner, you're correct that we do need to have, a close look at what we've planned for the next 10 years on water, because some of that may change. You're absolutely right. But
right, what Skip was saying too about parks, are we deviating to restore? It's kind of a big question. I have it about DOT, but all for a later time. All right, thank you.
Good question, but I think this particular consent item is pretty minor in scope and again already part of that budget. So, but I understand your concern. So I'm going to move to item R. This is our municipal golf course. I thought this was worth highlighting. Item R is an amendment to the operations agreement with the management entity at the municipal golf course. And so following the storm damage, excuse me, to the front 9 holes of the golf course, and that was pretty significant. The course at this time is only able to operate as a 9-hole course for the indefinite future. So they're only able to operate really the back 9. What this amendment does is it temporarily modifies the revenue share model that was in place, which we actually thought that, as we were moving into that, we thought that was going to be a very successful model. And we were excited about how it was working, but Hurricane Helene has kind of changed things a little bit. So this will modify that model through April 2025. And what that does, it gives staff some time to bring council some suggested long-term plans for the course and for the license agreement structure moving forward. And it allows the management entity between now and April to be able to continue operating this as a 9-hole course. So this just kind of buys us a little time to figure out what the long-term kind of plan is for that course. Councilwoman Roney.
I appreciate the time that we have to really think about long-term strategy, because we need that time as a level of priority that this is taking. I am curious about where that fits into our strategy for repairs done within 180 days, but also how this fits into the bigger conversation about damage to our parks and rec facilities. I did put in a question yesterday looking for some more information. I know everyone's hands are full, but I think it's going to have to be part of our asset management plan to know the damage, where we're at, and fixing them, what the percentages are that we're going to be able to recoup. I know a lot of us have those same questions. So I guess my question is, will that be part of the conversation? I know it's been brought up in the last council meeting and in our work session.
Yeah, I'm going to answer part of the question, then maybe see if Rachel and Brad want to jump in. So I'll say yes, there's definitely some long-term decisions that need to be made. This is really complex. Quite frankly, we're still doing damage assessment of city assets. But in the interim, like just with like parks and this golf course, there is some ability to operate portions of assets pretty quickly, and we know we can do that safely. So I do think this consent item is a reflection of our ability pretty easily with our existing resources to be able to at least offer a portion of this asset in the interim. So I think that's what this does, but I understand your question. There's also a bigger conversation that has to be had about the muni and all the other assets that have been damaged. And Rachel, do you want to add anything? Did I miss anything on that, or?
You covered it really well, and we do have plans for I believe the date is January 9th agenda briefing. Jade Dundas, who's leading our infrastructure recovery support group, is going to provide an overview of just the state of city assets, just so that you all have some more baseline information regarding the amount of impact that we receive from storm damage across the board. And you're going to get a high-level overview from our resources at Hagerty on just the public assistance process. So the 180 days that was referenced is for those emergency protective measures, those basically immediate costs that we need to make just in order to ensure the safety of our assets, but not necessarily those longer-term expenditures that we will be reimbursed for. So we'll talk about that in greater detail at your January 9th meeting. And then at Tuesday's work session, the intent of that conversation is to get some feedback from you as we're starting to look longer term at those longer term, what does the ultimate replacement of these assets or resilience measures look like? We want to get some feedback from you preliminarily to kind of start framing our thoughts as staff, but we're going to be working with you along the way, heading into your retreat in February. And then throughout the budget development process, we'll be talking about recovery and how we prioritize the work that's going to be done with our broader CIP. I mean, this ties back to the earlier conversation we were having regarding our bond funds. So this is going to be an ongoing conversation that we are going to have with City Council regarding how do we prioritize the work? What should our focus be, knowing that we do have recoverable expenses coming through FEMA, and then some of the expenses that we may want to make over and above what FEMA would reimburse. Still, from a strategic perspective, we want to get feedback from you on that as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think what I'm also trying to piece together in this puzzle is parts of communications I received from city staff suggest that there are updates from Parks and Rec. And so I wanted to make sure that everyone has access to the information before we go into the work session so that we are all able to operate from the same place of understanding.
And we saw your request. We were not exactly clear what was being referenced in terms of updates from Parks and Recreation. I'm not aware of that resource being available, but we can certainly make it available if there is such a resource out there.
Okay. One last item I'm going to cover on consent. Item W is a not to exceed contract in the amount of $225,000. And this is with the city's new vendor, Flowbird Incorporated. And they will provide mobile payment services for parking meters. The current contractor providing this service is Passport Labs or Passport Parking. This resolution also provides a 6-month extension of that existing contract with Passport to allow for a seamless transition between the two vendors. So what we're going to see happen for the community is we're going to move from Passport Parking to Flowbird. So that'll be a new vendor for when you pay for parking in a parking meter. But we are going to try to create some overlap so we can minimize any disruption to our parkers in the downtown area. Councilwoman Turner.
Ben, you may not be aware, but I think council was contacted by Passport when the RFP process was out, and they said, I guess failure to supply one document on time led them to be out chosen or something. I'm just curious. I mean, if it's a hiccup, it's a process to replace a vendor. Are we getting a better deal or something? With so much going on, can we not just simplify and keep what we got? They were upset. Are we not upset? Does it need to change? I mean, there's a lot of questions, but I'm wondering if anybody's just really, with all that's going on, thought about this, because they were upset to lose the contract. It sounded like a document exchange. If it's smoother and easier to just continue, maybe it should be thought about. I don't know. It seems odd.
Sage, perhaps I can cover that. As I understand it, this was actually an issue where the legal requirements placed on the bidding process were not fully complied with. And I know that can be frustrating, obviously, to those who are going through the bidding process themselves, but it does not leave us any authority to allow someone with an incomplete bid to move forward in the process. And these are things that are defined by state law, which means even if we wanted to perhaps look the other way or make exceptions, we don't have the legal authority to do so, unfortunately.
Are you aware of the situation, Brad? Because they didn't seem to think they were, had done something significant. It sounded like one document wasn't included.
That's right, but it was actually one of the required documents. And state law actually requires any list of documents that we require you to provide, they must be provided, or else you are automatically deemed non-responsive. And we are only by law allowed to consider people who are fully responsive and responsible. This is something that I get the frustration from a sort of efficiency perspective, but this actually happens fairly often, not just here in Asheville, but throughout the state. And when we have people who don't submit the proper forms to show that they've complied with some of the legal requirements and our own policies, like our ABI policy, we cannot, by state law, judge them to be fully responsive, and we are required to eliminate those from consideration. Otherwise, we expose ourselves to challenges of a legal nature on our procurements in general.
Yeah, that all makes sense when stated like that. It's helpful. I get it. It's frustrating too.
Helpful but frustrating. That is a perfect way to articulate it.
I appreciate the extra context.
Certainly.
Hey, that is all I was planning to cover on the consent. Without seeing any hands raised, I will move to presentations and reports. We have one presentation on the agenda. The city's external auditors will present the fiscal year 2024 audit of full council. Earlier in the day, they'll also present the audit at a joint meeting of the Policy, Finance, and Human Resources Council Committee and the Audit Committee. So Tuesday is going to be a big audit day for the community. I think we actually have a lot of good news in the audit, but I'll save that for Tony. And just speaking of Tony, who's not on the call, and y'all know he usually is for anything finance, I want to tell you why Tony's not on the call. I want to acknowledge Tony. Tony McDowell, our finance director, will be recognized at a state conference today and receive the North Carolina Local Government Budget Association's Award for outstanding commitment to the advancement of local government budgeting and evaluation. So that is a very long name for an award, but it's a budget award, so it has to be that way. But I just want to recognize and really appreciate Tony for all he does for our community, and he's been here a long time doing it. So hopefully he'll watch this.
That award, the only thing that award title was missing was an acronym. That would have really landed it. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm sure budget have their share of acronyms they use. But anyways, yeah, just really happy for Tony on that. He'll be, of course, back with us on Tuesday. Moving on, and these are the last items that I'll cover on the agenda today. We have 2 public hearings scheduled for Tuesday. The first, item A, is a public hearing to amend the city's CDBG annual action plan to allow the city to receive a $1.7 million, approximately, it's a little over that, additional grant funding that we are able to use for Helene-related rental assistance, business grants, and emergency sheltering. So my understanding is in order to receive this money, we've got to make some adjustments to that annual action plan. So that's one item you'll be doing. The other part of this I want to flag is there's also a proposed amendment to the action plan that will allow the repurposing of about $380,000 that was originally allocated for improvements to Stevens Lee, but instead that money will be able to be repurposed to Parks and Recreation disaster recovery efforts to help bring park assets back online. Councilman Mosley.
So just so council knows, D. Tyrell McGirt took the opportunity to speak with the representatives from the East End Valley Street Neighborhood Association. He explained what's going on to them, and they are in agreement about this process. So I wanted to thank D. Tyrell, and they're especially thankful that they were brought in early. And I just wanted council to know that.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, for that important context and the work of D. Tyrell to communicate this. Anybody else on A? So I will move to public hearing item B. This is an amendment to multiple sections of the UDO intended to better align our existing city regulations with North Carolina State Building Code and the North Carolina State Model Flood Ordinance. I'll go ahead and tell you, and Councilwoman Ullman sat through this last night, and I think she will agree with me that these are really technical changes in nature. We think they are needed to not only make sure we comply or are consistent with the building code, but also I think an important element of these changes is just to make sure that we remain in good standing with the National Flood Insurance Program, which is a program we're a part of that helps reduce insurance premiums for those in flood zones. It can also give us access to FEMA funding streams related to flood damage. So one thing that's important about this amendment is that it does not establish new policy. That's not the intention of this. The intention is to do some technical adjustments to the ordinance to get that type of consistency, but also just to make sure, or to highlight to the community, this ordinance does not, nor does it preclude City Council from future policy actions related to our flood ordinance or any redevelopment activities. Staff gave a really detailed report last night on these amendments. Planning and Zoning Commission asked a lot of questions. They were really engaged. I watched it. It was a good, I think, again, Councilman Ullman was in attendance. It was a really robust discussion. After that detailed discussion, Planning and Zoning Commission did recommend approval on a 6-1 vote. And I'll stop there, and Councilwoman Turner.
That's fascinating. I was going to ask about committee review, so I'll go watch the PZ meeting. Is there a marked up copy of these changes somewhere that we can review ahead of Tuesday?
Yes, we have a marked up copy that will be, I would assume would be in the agenda package, but I'll make sure it's there.
Okay.
Councilman
So-
Coleman.
Well, just one last question. Sorry. So these are mostly to help and assist. These are not things that are going to suddenly prevent people from rebuilding, for example.
I mean, I know Brad's going to want to answer. I just want to say they're not going to, you can always rebuild it. Let's real quick. You can always rebuild in a flood hazard area. It's just, there's based on the extent of damage, there's different things you may have to do as part of that rebuild. So such as flood.
This is touching some of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the intent, I mean, what I want to say, and Brad, please jump in. I think these changes reflect the way the city has consistently administered the flood ordinance for many years now. And I'll stop there and let Brad probably add to that, and then we can get to the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Councilmember Turner, I want to answer your question as succinctly as possible and say that for the context of someone rebuilding, different from someone trying to build something completely new, I don't think anyone will see any change whatsoever as a result of this. The reality, as Ben has described it, is that the impetus behind these changes is really twofold. Number one is purely bringing our existing code in compliance with the state building code, which is paramount to our code anyway. As this council knows, when one of those big governmental entities, the federal government or the state government, changes the law or updates things, we then have to subsequently update our laws to make sure that we're in compliance. That also has the beneficial effect of removing any disparity of information or confusion that someone looking to rebuild would feel if they see that maybe the state building code says something different than our code, when in reality, you always have to follow the state building code. But the second aspect of this is to ensure that we are compliant with the model ordinance that's put out by the National Flood Insurance Program. This is something that actually allows us to remain in that program. Without that, people in this area, if they did choose to rebuild, they would not be able to potentially even get flood insurance, or they certainly wouldn't be able to get them at the same rates. It would go up if they were even able to get it at all. So there are a litany of potential changes that this council may consider in the future that are much more policy-based, substantive changes. No one, I think, that is trying to rebuild will see a difference, except there's probably going to be less confusion if they're trying to examine our code and the state building code. But everything else should be exactly the same. State law is in place already, which will protect those people who are already rebuilding. I don't think they will see any difference whatsoever. And it's why we're characterizing these as really technical amendments and not something that will change the way we currently process or review these.
Go ahead, Maggie.
Thanks, Antoinette. Yes, that was a big part of the discussion. So you said that way better than anyone else could have said. The other thing I wanted to add was the dissenting vote was asking about community engagement because, this is an ordinance change. I think ultimately, my perspective is by really fortifying through our ordinance what we've already been asking the community to comply with previous to this will make future policy conversations even more crystal clear, because right now just some T's aren't crossed and I's aren't dotted. And so this will allow us to say, like, crisp, here's where we're starting, what changes maybe we want in the future. In particular, a question was, since we don't have and commissions right now, we have a riverfront redevelopment commission. I also am the liaison to that. So I've talked with the chair. I'm talking to the vice chair later this afternoon. So hopefully by council, I can kind of share back some of the conversations I'm hearing from them. But the initial sentiments from talking from those commission members is eagerness to talk about more substantive policy changes and big community engagement around that, and understanding that crisping the current information is kind of where I'm seeing it too, for hoping that we approve this on Tuesday.
So cool. Thanks for that, Maggie, because my question was about the dissent. I was wondering why that was, and you answered that. So I guess, Ben, back to you. My question's been answered.
Any other questions on public hearing item B? Councilwoman Turner, we'll make sure that markup is included in materials. And again, if anybody really is interested, the Planning Zoning Commission was a really detailed discussion on this item.
Thank you. I appreciate the extra context. It has my nerves a little sensitive because I have not seen anything. So I'm like, wow, what are we changing in the flood zone quickly? But okay, I look forward to seeing it. Thank you.
Great.
And Sage, I can share the PZC materials. I think that there's one additional edit that came out of discussion last night, another non-substantive, but there's a lot about like, the ordinance says this, and then it refers to the definitions. The definitions, the state wrote, and they live somewhere else. But it's just a lot of really like clarifying policy that's changed here, there, state beds over time and aligning it. But the short thing of what I'm trying to say is I can send you a link to the PZC file so you can look at that, and there'll only be one teeny X different from what was shared yesterday and what would come to us on Tuesday.
Maggie, you're the PZ liaison right now.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. So I guess from your perspective, is the response to the emergency what made us find out these things weren't in line with state building codes?
We'd already had, there was some, I'm not going to say the technical acronym, but there was some type of that we were just cycled and ready to have happen anyhow. And that happened in June. And it was basically crisping up what, recommended and best practice language comes from the state and kind of their, again, recommended stuff. And state had made changes quasi recently, and so they come and cycle through. So this was kind of text amendments that were on when staff had the time, but are very relevant now as people are asking very detailed, thorough questions. So
thank you. I'll read over and watch the meeting. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'm not going to call on Amy, but Amy Deaton, our interim public works director, she's on the call, but she did the presentation last night, and Councilwoman Turner, she actually covered exactly what you asked, and Maggie did a pretty good job of actually answering it. But there's basically 3 buckets that generate these amendments, and not all of them are Helene related. Some of these are already queued up, but we'll have more detail on that. So that concludes the agenda review. And Vice Mayor, I can quickly cover 2 more items, and we can move into the other issues and updates if that sounds good.
Please do.
Okay. We have one special council committee meeting scheduled for December 10th. Again, this is the day of the audit. So as I referenced earlier, we'll have the special joint meeting of the Policy Finance Council Committee and the Audit Committee. And then I want to turn my attention to the 8-week agenda. We want to flag 2 items on the 8-week agenda just to know they're coming up. And these are regular business. So this is 2 things that are not related to Helene. First is on January 14th, we have scheduled a public hearing for the downtown bid operator contract consideration. So we've been through the RFP and selection process. We have identified we had 2 responses, 1 scored higher. So we have staff has contract negotiations with that potential vendor, and we will have that information to you for your consideration at your January 14th meeting. And then the other item I want to flag, and this is a holdover from pre-Helene activities, is on February 1st, you have 2 public hearings on the agenda for cottage development standards and flag lot standards. So that feels like a lifetime ago, but those actually are still out there. And of course, they were continued to a date certain. I don't know where we'll land with those, but again, those are the items that are looking at you for next year. So any questions on the 8-week agenda? Or 211, thank you, Maggie. Yes, 211 for those 2 text amendments. If hearing none, Councilwoman Ullman.
Is Maggie frozen for anyone else, or is it just me?
is that thing? Did that come through? Hello?
Kind of. Say something else? Okay.
Let's see if this is working. Thank you. So the 8-week agenda is typically just for the council meetings, but I'm wondering if we can also project out the Helene work sessions. And I know that we're going to really start digging in on Tuesday. So I don't know that we even have an arc of what those work sessions are going to look like, but that's just something I'd love us to start foreshadowing and anticipating. You know, an experience yesterday with being the PZC meeting is there's so many people that love our community and are just anxious and eager to contribute. And so starting to show the arc of how council is going to be thinking about recovery and any crystal ball information on future timing, I think is just helpful. We don't have all of it, but just wanted to share that this 8-week agenda might also be a place to foreshadow work sessions or other things relevant, because I think people are eager for it.
Looks like Maggie's on it.
So that concludes my portion of the agenda review. And I think we have, Vice Mayor, other issues and updates next. And I think maybe Rachel will kick that part off if we're ready to go.
Sure. Thank you, Ben. And I'm just going to really quickly introduce Dawa Hitch and Holly Barham, who are leading our data and communications recovery support group. Our plan, kind of to build on what Councilmember Ullman was just saying, is to use a portion of each of the agenda briefings just to give you all updates on the great work that's happening with our recovery support groups, to get feedback from you all. And as I mentioned earlier, just to make sure you're coming with us every step along the way, even from the operational work that we're doing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dawa to start today's presentation.
Thank you, Rachel, and good afternoon, Vice Mayor and council members. Again, I'm Dawa Hitch and serve as the Communication and Public Engagement Director for the city. And today, again, I'll be joined by Holly Barham from our Information Technology Services Department. I'll start with the piece on communication, and then we'll flow into Holly's piece on data. So really a pleasure to be here and share this work. Next slide. So a few key takeaways. As Rachel mentioned, the Data and Communications Recovery Support Group is one of the groups within our recovery framework, and we are here to provide support to the City of Asheville's entire recovery support framework. Our current efforts are focused on tracking progress, proactive communication, prioritizing information based on community questions, and connecting people to current resources. So those communication resources are being built to transition from emergency response communication to short-term recovery communication, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in these next slides. And we also have an interim dashboard while we continue developing our long-term data strategy. So I know that Holly's really excited to share that great work from her team. That interim dashboard contains data that was readily available and addresses community questions. And then the long-term strategy includes working closely with the subject matter experts in the recovery support groups to identify data needed to make data-driven decisions. And then finally, we're focusing on data within the sphere of responsibility, while also working with partner agencies in that same area of data. And that goes for communications as well. So we'll hop into the communication side of things. Our strategy is to communicate early and often in an accessible way. Our strategy is also to connect all content to original source material as information is continuously being updated. And that's a really important thing. We're hearing a lot from the community that there's some overwhelm with all the different areas from which people are getting information. So working really hard to make sure that there's one home base and that we're sharing links to that home base so that everybody's got the most up-to-date information. And that's a communication best practice, especially when we're talking about digital information. So then we're also continuing to work with partners to share information to extend that reach. And then we want to lead with what the community is requesting, honoring that we want to focus first on what's most present of mind for our community and trying to meet that need. We certainly want to integrate our core values in the communication strategy and the assets that are produced through that. And then finally, we want to make sure that we are quickly addressing misinformation. Next slide. So here's where we are today with our communication efforts. I know that you all have seen this National Response Framework graph before, and I just wanted to share in that blue circle, you'll see this is where we are now with respect to our communications. So we've got overlap of our immediate urban emergency response, amping down. We're in our intermediate recovery. And then at the same time, we're thinking about our long-term recovery. So you can see all of those things are overlapping each other right now. And that's just a good snapshot of where we are with our communication. So you've seen us kind of ramping down on the daily updates about water, meal distribution with the pods closing down, and we're moving into more communication about where we are right now in our recovery efforts, always keeping in mind that we've got this long-term recovery that we're going to be working through, and we just want to make sure that the foundation we have is supportive of that. So kind of working in all three of those areas right now today, certainly moving towards the intermediate more. So what that means for our team is that we're phasing from the emergency recovery communication to recovery communication only. And what that looks like in detail is we're moving away from the life safety communications where food and water and immediate temporary shelter is available, then recognizing that we need to continue that conversation with our short-term recovery in the areas. These are just examples. These are certainly not all of them, but housing, debris, economic recovery, just as examples. And then again, planning's underway for long-term recovery, communication, and engagement. Next slide. So here are some short-term recovery communication actions that are currently underway, and we'll talk a little bit more about each of these in the coming slides. The first was an assessment of city council and community questions, and that was used to inform the data and communication prioritization for where we are right now. Holly will speak a little bit more about that as she talks about the dashboard, our interim dashboard that she and her team have been working on. We've also secured the domain for a new recovery website. So there will be a standalone recovery website. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We've been building the engagement. We're in the process of building the engagement hub. We're also building the audience to continue to be able to inform people that have general interests as well as specific interests. And then we're building our communication and engagement plan. So we'll move into the next slide so I can share a little more detail about each of those. So back to that tracking community question. So due to the nature of the disaster, there is an enormous volume of information that continues to evolve. So again, we wanted to be mindful of what we're hearing from you all, what we're hearing from the community, and having that help us in prioritizing all of the different things that we could be communicating about, wanting to find that sweet spot of what is too much information, what's the right information at this point in time. So as we work through that assessment and as we're in these beginning 8 stages of short-term recovery, here are the areas where we pulled information to inform that prioritization, both in our priority messages as well as the data piece of this. So that was through council questions, neighborhood feedback. So since, day one of the event, our neighborhood services team has been doing their job, continuing relationship building with neighborhoods, sharing information and getting feedback. We've been tracking the community questions that have been sent to the Joint Information Center. So I just want to say thank you, Council, for all of those emails that you have been sending to that Joint Information Center email. That's really helped us get a good grasp, I guess, kind of comprehensively of where the community is. So thank you for that. Also, of course, tracking through social media, questions that we're getting from the media, and then questions we're hearing in stakeholder meetings. And there are some of those happening on a smaller kind of scale, certainly not anything that's massive on a very formal engagement yet in that area. Next slide. So I mentioned that we'd secured the domain for the recovery site, and some might be asking why would we want to do that? And the new website will be a .org domain. And why that's important is because of course currently have our asheville.nc.gov. And the .gov domain is fantastic. It gives us amazing search engine optimization. That means when people Google things, we show up very high in the algorithm that's used behind those search engines. And .gov, of course, domains also have a level of trust and accountability that we're certainly grateful for having. And they also have some limitations. So this is from the U.S. Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency, and this is something that's always in the back of our minds as we're developing content for our .gov website. And that is a .gov domain must not be used for commercial purposes, must not be used. And that includes advertising that benefits private individuals or entities. So knowing that recovery is going to certainly be there's going to be a lot of public-private partnerships. We just wanted to acknowledge that and make sure that there's space for us to share any kind of communications that we'd like without limitation. Because the consequence for not following these directives from the feds with the .gov is that we could lose that .gov address, and that could certainly have an impact on our overall communication. So this new site will allow for information sharing of private and nonprofit resources. It'll be an opportunity perhaps to communicate what's happening at the state and federal level to support recovery. We'll be able to track progress through dynamic dashboards, and then we'll be able to connect to our engagement hub where engagement can be managed and reported in an accessible and transparent manner. So moving into the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about that engagement hub. So all of you, many of you, most of you are familiar with our public input engagement hub. We've had that up and running for a few years. So again, the new website will be complemented by the platform and the resources we have through the engagement hub. So a few things that engagement hub will allow for is for the community to subscribe to the information that they care most about. And we're here again, I'll talk in the next slide about what that means in a little bit more detail. And it will also allow the community to send in questions that staff can use to develop and track relevant information. So that's kind of where we are right now in the engagement things as we're ramping up our recovery efforts. We want to continue to hear what the community has questions about so that we can share that with the RSGs, and that can also inform our data prioritization as well as our communication efforts. The engagement hub will also allow the community to track progress through a dynamic timeline. And we know that's important for accountability. And then it will allow staff to proactively send comprehensive information to the community. So what we're doing kind of across the board, as well as information based on people's specific interests. It'll also give staff the opportunity to have a better understanding of the audiences we are reaching and adapt our communication and engagement approach as needed. Again, that's through the demographic information we've been collecting for years, and people can choose to submit when they're subscribing to our list. It's really helpful for us to understand, are we meeting people from all income levels? Are we connecting with people who live in certain geographic areas of the city? That can be very helpful to us in our communication strategy. It's of course an area where we have the opportunity for transparency as we move into future engagement. And then it also allows for the seamless integration of meetings and for task forces or recovery updates. All of those things can kind of live in that place so that folks can track that and see our track record of what we've been doing as we've moved through time in this recovery effort. Next slide. So back to building that audience. So during our initial emergency response, we were able to build a distribution list for those daily updates that I know many of you have seen. So those were going out on a regular basis. They were distributed in a number of ways to the pods, for example, of course, to the media. And then it also went out to a pretty extensive neighborhood list. And we've had a lot of feedback from those neighborhoods confirming and thanking the team for doing that, because what they were able to then do was to extend that information through their neighborhood level networks. So we really want to continue that momentum that we experienced there with recognizing that we are not the only way for people to get information, but tapping into our neighborhood level resources to extend that reach. So currently that list has 517 people subscribed. And again, a number of those are neighborhoods that are then being extended further. That daily information sheet was seeing a 55 to 59% open rate, which is a pretty good open rate for newsletter type communications. And then again, we've heard through multiple neighborhood leaders that they've been taking that information and sharing it through their networks. And we'll continue to grow. This is one of the great opportunities we have with our public input platform. The customer relations module on the back end of that, we'll be able to continue to grow that list and integrate other distribution lists that we maintain, such as the downtown safety and cleanliness list and or neighborhood news. And again, we'll be able to bring that into the different recovery topic areas. And then finally, we'll be able to push invitations to subscribe through all of those to subscribe through all of our city social platforms. So you might be wondering, how do you get there? How do you subscribe? We haven't launched the complete engagement hub yet, but there's a component of it that is now accessible from the front page of the website. So our simplified website, you can go there and there's a button that you can click on. And so and through that button, you can choose to subscribe, join that list, and you can choose as we move forward, weekly updates that will be more comprehensive in nature, or you could subscribe to just some of the recovery areas that you're most interested in. Again, that's a nod to what we're hearing about people's overwhelm with information. So folks will have some choices there. And again, that's on the front page of the website. Next slide. So into communication and engagement plans. So work is underway to develop a communication and engagement plan. We've had some good progress with the communication and engagement plans that are oriented towards each of the recovery groups, recognizing that there may be different audiences for those groups, and wanting to make sure that the people that are interested in those specific areas are getting the detailed information that they need. So the team's done a great job of pulling those together. And then we're going to have an overarching communication and engagement plan that is bringing in, that is honoring that we've got other things that we typically engage on that we're going to make sure we want to fold into or at least complement with our recovery efforts. Two of those things being budget, as we move through the budget process this year, as well as implementation of our bond program. So there's going to be some intention put behind making sure that we're looking at all of those things comprehensively and communicating about them comprehensively. So I do want to note that those communication and engagement plans are living documents, and they will continue to evolve as we move through this process. First, they'll be focusing on activities through February 1st of 2025, and that will be happening simultaneously while we're evolving into long-term recovery communication and engagement based on council and community feedback. So again, efforts are underway to integrate budget outreach and bond implementation with recovery engagement. Next slide. I thought it might be helpful both for council and the community just to have a quick overview of what is included in a communication and engagement plan. So I wanted to make sure everybody knows that within the development of those, there is an equity and engagement analysis. For example, we're looking at who will benefit, who will be burdened, what has the community told us with respect to the project that the plan's related to. We're identifying who the stakeholders and audiences are, doing our best to do that, and certainly working in partnership with other folks outside of City Hall to determine that. We're looking at communication objectives and risks. There are a few listed here. For example, a communication objective would be delivering accurate information that's inclusive, transparent, accessible, and impactful for all partners and stakeholders. And then, of course, reporting back what we've heard. Risks, we identify those with each of our communication and engagement plans. And here's an example of one that we've heard, and that's that the community is feeling overwhelmed with information. So we want to put a lot of intention behind how we're packaging everything to minimize that. We list the communication tools that are best suited for the particular project. I've listed some there. They include stakeholder meetings, website, video, graphics, dashboards, for example. We also work through key messages, what the public participation strategy is going to be, and being very intentional about that, using best practices from the International Association of Public Participation to be very clear about what level of engagement we're talking about, whether it's informing, consulting, involving, collaborating, or empowering. And then finally, there's the communication and engagement timeline. And this one will have a comprehensive one to make sure, again, that we're minimizing community fatigue as we're working through the work of each of the recovery support groups and any other priorities that are identified as we move through council's work sessions and then the retreat coming in February. Next slide. All right, so I mentioned in the earlier slide that there are a number of ways that we can communicate, and as we transition into the dashboard, I just thought it could be helpful to highlight that there are a lot of different ways that we can communicate information. One way, if it's static information, is certainly through graphics. And of course, when we do that, and especially when they're being shared online, we want to make sure that there's alt text and other accessibility features built into that. So for example, people that use a machine reader who might have a visual impairment can still understand what that visual is. So these static graphics are one tool, and dashboards, which are dynamic, are another tool, and both are options. Of course, the static graphics are things that we can build quicker than a dashboard. So just want to make sure folks know that there's always this transitional option that we have of sharing information through a number of different tools. All right, so Council Member Roney, I see your hands up, and that actually is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Well, if we can go back to that graphic, I just wanted to share something that I'm learning about inclusivity, and it's that using all capital letters is not readable for low and no vision readers. As I guess what I'm learning is that it needs to just have a combination of upper and lowercase. Sometimes we use all lowercase, and it's as a design element meant to draw attention or to highlight or to use as a headline, but it can limit access to information. So I just wanted to share that I'm learning that.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And we continue to learn and are happy to take any feedback, because there are some things that happen that can be really uncomfortable for people using those tools, and we've been learning some of those things along the way. For example, font size, and if it's all caps, can be interpreted by those readers in ways that are not helpful.
An example that came up is if we put "do not drink water" and the word "not" is in all caps, it might not read.
That's exactly the example that I was thinking of, that we learned from in this event. So thank you for sharing that.
And then while I am in this question mode, I just wanted to say, I think our organization is really lucky to have your steady hand in this engagement work for continuity of communication. So thank you. I am curious about consistency between our engagement hubs, because we've worked for years to build community engagement. So has there been an effort to try to make sure we're not trying to teach our community a whole new way of engaging, but to sync up, and maybe it's an opportunity to update old engagement hub opportunities for like our live meetings, Because I know that was one of the things that came up with our realignment working group, is to have that consistency.
So it is the same platform. So the engagement hub that we're building is within that public input infrastructure. So yes, that continuity between how people have experienced engagement through that tool will continue to be similar to what they are, basically the same. Each project looks a little bit different, but it is the same platform that we'll be using. So the difference will be as we move further into the effort. You know, right now we have our city website, and then we've got our engagement hub that complements it. This will just be a different website, but it will still have the same public input platform complementing it. If that.
And then, thank you. That's very helpful. And
Yeah.
then the last question I had was, we were doing some work before Helene to upfit community spaces so we could have more engagement in person, but also hybrid and virtual options for community meetings. And I know for some folks, especially if they have limited access to the internet, it can be helpful to have that in-person option. I was just wondering where we're at in the timeline and what it looks like to be able to have some in-person and hybrid options for engagement.
Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. So part you all have probably heard we have continuity of operations plan. So as we were moving out of as we were in our emergency response, we've been through this process over the last few years of identifying what things might need to be on pause as we're focusing efforts towards life safety efforts across the organization. So while we have been the community space upfit project, we've not been able to, I guess, have our resources focused specifically on that, but it has been it's been underneath the work that we've been doing to respond to Helene. So for example, while we were out distributing one-pagers, we were also talking with neighbors about, well, where are people meeting, trying to collect information, knowing that could be great information when we are able to go back and pick up our community space upfit project. And we expect here in the next, we've had discussions as a team, and we expect that we're going to be moving forward with that in the coming weeks, next couple of months. And we're at a really fortunate time because people have now seen what they might need in those spaces if we're in a real emergency. One example that we've talked about as a team is there weren't that many sites that had requested generators, for example. And we want to go back and have started those conversations, but going back to those neighborhoods saying, you know, like, here's the funding that you have. Do you think after being through this emergency that perhaps a generator could be helpful to your community as a community gathering space in the beginning? Starlink, that technology is another topic that has come up in that same vein, that might be something that the sites want to consider having, just seeing what we had to work through with having limited cellular activity through this event. So I guess in short, I know that was a lot of information. It's not halted. The work there did slow down while we were in our emergency response, but we tried to remain mindful of learning what we could since it's so applicable to the goals for that project.
Thank you, Dawa.
You're welcome. Okay, any other questions? Or I can, Miss Farm has a great unveiling for you all. I can slide over to her part of the presentation. Just appreciate y'all's time.
Thank you, Dawa, for you and your team's great work. Good afternoon, Vice Mayor, Council. I'm Holly Barham, and I serve as the Director of Information Technology Services. Now, I apologize in advance. I have the cold that's going around, so I may need some frequent sips of water, so bear with me a little bit, please. So I wanted to start with sharing some information. The city has extensively leveraged climate justice data throughout the storm response to address community needs. This data has guided the placement of the satellite communication trailers, the comfort care stations, and the distribution sites, ensuring resources are focused on areas with the greatest need. One of the most powerful examples of this work comes from our Emergency Operations Center. Led by Development Services, damage assessments were conducted and data was collected to identify the most vulnerable residents based on property damage. Coordinated through the EOC and powered by the GIS platform that we manage here in ITS, this information enabled targeted action. AFD's resource engagement support teams were dispatched to check on residents potentially living in restricted and unsafe residential structures. They ensured these residents were safe, they had access to food and medication, and were connected to essential resources. This collaborative effort demonstrates how data-driven decision-making can directly support and protect our most vulnerable populations during emergencies. In order to continue leveraging data to make decisions, and as a part of our recovery framework, IT Services has put together a cross-functional data team. Our data objectives are to develop a data collection and data management strategy for recovery, including data visualization based on community engagement. In collaboration with the RSGs, develop key performance indicators to track progress in specific recovery areas and promote data-driven approach to recovery and resilience planning, ensuring decisions are based on evidence and informed by the latest information. Next slide, please. One of our first steps has been to work with the recovery support groups to build out a data inventory and identify data that we have available, as well as data needs. This will serve as our guide as we publish data. Working closely with those subject matter experts informs what data we need in order to make those data-driven decisions. We created an interim dashboard, and it's based on the available data that we had from our inventory, as long as the most pressing community questions. Then we learned that from working closely with CAPE. And we're going to continue to work with partner agencies, but for now our focus is on city-owned data, and doing so allows us to ensure data quality, privacy, and security. Next slide, please. So we do have an interim dashboard, and I'm going to jump into that next and share it with you. It covers storm debris, damage assessments, lien spending, and lien-related building and trade permits. Was there a question? Okay. Talia, if you don't mind, I'll take over the screen sharing. Thank you. So I wanted to show you where you can find the dashboard. It's on that homepage that we have reduced for being able to see easily. So if you click on Recovery Dashboard, it takes you to these metrics. So it starts out with storm debris, and it's showing the amount of I'm sorry, I've said that word a lot today, amount of debris that's been collected in cubic yards. We're getting this information directly from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the storm debris team is sharing it with us. We've also included the link to the storm debris page so that you can easily access information. So it's all linked. This is information that was already on our website, but we've put it close together so that people can answer questions that they have easily. We also have the building safety assessments. Again, we link to the assessment guide so that if you get one of these plaques on your door, you can go here and know exactly what that means and what your next steps would be. Excuse me. We've included this map link. So the building safety assessment data is coming from DSD. Let me share this tab. All right. So the map itself lets you see residential versus commercial assessments, as well as filter by inspected, restricted, and unsafe. So if you toggle back and forth, you can see, and it'll change the numbers on the side. So you can see the restricted and what it looks like on the map as well. You can also toggle to see unsafe, residential, and commercial. If you click on one of these dots, which represents a property that's had an assessment, You can see the estimated building damage as well as the climate justice score. It also shows you the percent below the federal poverty line and the percent BIPOC for the census block group where that property is located. Our next step is to build out some reporting with that aggregated demographic information from the climate justice GIS layer. Intentionally, you can't zoom in to see property addresses. We wanted to protect people's privacy. We also have City of Asheville Helene spending. It is showing both funds that have been spent and funds that are obligated. There's a link to the city contracts page. So if you click on Explore All City Contracts, it'll take you to the open data portal. So here you can go through and look at all the city contracts. These are not just Helene contracts. This is everything that we have, but it gives you more information. And then the final piece for this iteration of the dashboard includes Helene-related building permits applied for and issued. As I said, sorry, this interim dashboard was developed by using data we had readily available with the engagement the CAPE team has done. We're working closely with recovery support groups and building out our long-term strategy. Some of the next data sets that will be available include city-funded business grants, the homeowner repair program, and rental assistance. Do y'all have any questions?
Holly, this is amazing. Great job, team. Great job. I think this is the kind of dashboard I needed visually, but also the drilling down to the GIS level is very helpful. I would love to be able to overlay other layers. Is this going to be the map? Is it a layer available to us? A shapefile somewhere?
Yes, I'll get with Kristen. She leads our GIS team and we'll get back with you on that. But yeah, it's also our intention to keep adding layers and have some more dynamic data.
As a fellow GIS nerd, bravo. I appreciate the efforts.
Thank you. It's a real team effort for sure.
Kim?
Thank you, Holly. This is exactly what I've been asking for and hoping for, and I know it takes a lot of work. So one of the things that's coming up is when we had the missing middle housing study and displacement risk assessment on the city's website, there were a series of videos on how to use it, and that was really helpful. So given that the staff has already spent so much time building this tool, it's not a bad idea to have a way to use it. I'm sure the community will dig in a little bit. I'm certainly willing to do my part in helping with analyzing that, and just wanted to suggest that since we've already shown that we know how to do that, it could be useful when you're trying to engage the community.
Thank you. That's a great idea.
I have a random debris question. And, we've been seeing the meter, the percentage of debris pickup. Has anybody figured out like how long it's going to take to get 3 million cubic yards?
We will have a debris update for you at a future agenda briefing. I can note for you that 3 million is not just right-of-way. That also includes debris in the waterway and other debris. So the number is a little bit misleading because we have made a huge dent in our debris that's on the right-of-way, but seeing it in the grand scheme of all debris that needs to be collected in some ways makes it look like we haven't made as much progress as we have. But we'll have some more updates for you very soon, specific to debris.
Awesome. I do think that the newer contractor is doing a fantabulous job, and I'm hearing great feedback from people simply seeing the grapple truck. So I think it's been a good move to be in all zones as well. Yeah, I know it's a long haul, but I'm just kind of curious if it's 2027 or 2030. That's all.
Well, thanks, Dala and Holly. We're coming close to the end of our time. I'm wondering if council has any more questions, or Ben and Rachel, do you have anything else to share with us before we adjourn? Any other questions from council? Okay, Maggie.
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering, we're having this work session on Tuesday, and wondering when we'll get to kind of weigh in on that agenda or review those materials.
Yes, the plan is to have the outline to you tomorrow. My understanding is it's going to be more of a dialogue facilitated by Bo Mills, who's formerly with Metro Mayor, is now with a company called Fountain Works. But this is really seeking feedback from City Council. There will be a few slides provided by Tracy Phillips from Haggerty just on high-level long-term recovery planning efforts, and we can certainly share those slides with you tomorrow. But my understanding from Bo is the majority of the work session really is going to be a conversation facilitated by him amongst council members on just what your vision is as we head into that medium and longer term recovery planning phase.
Thanks.
Kim?
That brings up that I had, as a member of the Equity Engagement Committee, taken some time to try to find parallels between our work plan that we had already established and the recovery work plan. And I understood that might be part of the conversation. Are we going to be doing that for each of our committee work plans? Is that something that we need to be prepared to bring to the conversation, or is staff going to be curating that part of the conversation?
I don't know that we're going to get to that level of detail on Tuesday in terms of walking our existing work plans at the committee level with feedback that we get from you in terms of how you want us to be prioritizing our work for recovery. But as we head into the February retreat, that's definitely work that staff is going to do and want to get feedback from City Council on. So I think the work you did is excellent, and it's a great step as we look at preparing for the retreat and responding to the priority direction that we received from Council.
Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Unless there are any more questions, I think we can go ahead and adjourn, and I look forward to seeing everybody on Tuesday. Oh, bye-bye.